Good morning, or good afternoon, everybody. Sorry, it just turned 12:01. This is Jason Weller with the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness. Thank you for joining us today for our Advocacy 101 Understanding the Legislative Process webinar. Few housekeeping things, just make sure we're all on the same page in terms of how GoToWebinar works. So if you're unfamiliar with the platform or it's been a hot second since you used it, if you are having any issues with connection in terms of seeing the screen or audio or anything like that, the audio is dropping in and out. Unfortunately, that is something we don't have any control over. So I highly recommend you log out and log back in. Normally that hard reset will fix whatever's going on. But unfortunately, if there's any technical issues of that nature, that's not something we have any capacity to help out with. We do have a decent sized group of folks with us already, and I think we had a good number of folks register who I suspect will be joining us a little late because that's how these things tend to work. So because of that, we are going to keep everybody on the call muted. But if you do have questions for our presenter as she's covering the content, please feel free to use the questions toolbar that's on the right-hand side. There's a little icon next to it in case the box already isn't there. So you just click on that, the drop-down will pop up underneath it, type your question in, and then you just fire it off, and I will be monitoring that throughout the presentation. So that is the way to actually ask if you have any questions about any of the content that's being covered, or other things that might be occurring to you as we go through today's webinar. So in terms of our presenter, I just referenced her, we're being joined today by an absolute rock star, Renelle Weathers, the Community Engagement Director at the Michigan League for Public Policy. Cannot tell you how stoked we are that she is able and willing to lead today's discussion about the legislative process. You guys are in for a treat. So before I hand things off officially to Renelle, I do have a handful of poll questions I want to ask everybody that's joined us so that we get a better sense of who's on today's call. Because we do have an Advocacy Day coming up, we being the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness, have an Advocacy Day coming up on March 11th, and we know that we've been encouraging folks to participate in that. And we've also been encouraging the folks who are registered to participate in today's webinar. So we want to get a sense of kind of what the mix looks like for today. And it's totally fine that you're under no obligation to go to Advocacy Day if you're on today's webinar. I want to make that clear. But if you're not signed up yet, then there's an opportunity to do so. So I already see some folks filling in the yes, please tell me more. So a quick synopsis: Advocacy Day, March 11th, here in Lansing. It's an all-day event. This will be our fourth one. And basically we have folks, we have providers and folks with lived experience come in. It's a full day thing. We have folks come in around 8:30. We do some training in the morning. We have handouts, we have materials available, and then we have legislative visits starting in the late morning going into the afternoon. And so there it is in a nutshell. And really it's an opportunity for you to go out and meet with your legislators. And for those folks that fall into the please tell me more category, and I'll go ahead and close the poll because we've got almost 100% response. Then we will send out with the follow-up email I send out this afternoon. One of the things I'll include is the URL to the registration for the Advocacy Day. So yeah, it's kind of an even split. 56% say yes, they are planning to participate in Advocacy Day. 33% say no, and 11% tell me more. And nobody's here, or nobody was planning to come, whether it be depending on whether or not there were punchkis. So I guess they know punchkis go away after yesterday. So the second poll is whether or not you have ever met with an elected official. So kind of came up with an arbitrary number in terms of the 10 meetings. It's not like that's a magical number. If you've had more than 10 meetings, then you know everything. This is just more so Renelle can get a sense of how experienced folks are on today's webinar. And we'll give everybody maybe like, I don't know, 15 more seconds to respond. We already have a pretty good response rate. Y'all are on it today. And I think that's about as good as it's going to get. So share those results. So 6% of you have participated in more than 10 meetings with the legislators or elected officials. 50% of you have participated in some meetings, less than 10, and 44% have never participated, but you would like to, which is probably why you're here today. So with that, I will hide those results and then formally turn things over to Renelle. Renelle, the floor is yours. Please start by sharing a little bit about yourself with everybody that's on the webinar today.
Great, thanks so much, Jason. Hello, everyone, and so I'm really, it's great to be with you. And a little bit about my background. I've been with the Michigan League for Public Policy for about 9 years. Before that, I was a staffer for a U.S. congressman, and before that, I was a staffer for a state Senate leader. And so I have some experience about do's and don'ts, and also about how to successfully advocate. And that's going to be our focus today in preparation for your March 11th opportunity. And there's many opportunities to engage, and hopefully you will, use this as a stepping stone, and we'll share some tools, and hopefully there'll be more opportunities to have continuous sharing and learning. And for those of you who participate on March 11th, hopefully all of you will. Just by participating, you get a wealth of knowledge and experience. So hopefully you all will do that. So let's get started. And hopefully most of you know the League. I should have made that part of the poll question, but we've been around for a long time, 107 years, and we really focus on families and children living at the margins, right? Those struggling to make ends meet, and not only for them to just survive, we want to lead them into a thriving economy. And that's what we work towards through policy change. And we have several areas we focus on, but beyond these areas, we do have staff that actually have other knowledge as well. So we're not limited to what you see on the screen, but we use the focus of equity in all that we do. How is policy impacting families and children? Which policies are helping, which policies are harming? And then we are the producer of the Kids Count Michigan Data Book. So for today, we're going to do a civics review, and then we're going to kind of basically go through a basic government structure. Some of you, this will be a review, and others, it will be something that you may be unfamiliar with, and that's why I kind of start with the basics. We'll go through a little bit of the process, and then how do we actually, what's advocacy in action? How do we actually activate that skill? And so what is it, your role? We each have a role to play. Then influencers and messaging. So let's start with our review. And I remember 8th grade, when I was 8th grade, I won't tell you guys how many years ago that was, but we had civics class, and I'm not even sure they even do that anymore. But I also realized as an adult, I needed reminders. If you're not in this space all the time, you really don't recall all the little nuances and parts of civics and government. So state government, and our state is very similar to the federal government. We have a bicameral system, which is like 2 houses. We have a House of Representatives, and we have the Senate, and then we have the governor. Sometimes I call this slide knowing how to count, because when you think about advocacy, you have to think about who has the power to bring bills to the floor, who decides what goes to the floor. And that's based on who has the majority. As the League, we are nonpartisan. So whoever's in power, we work for families and children and based on issues. I always kind of start with no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, only permanent issues. What are the issues we really want to push today? And understanding who has the power is very important. So we have 110 districts for our House of Representatives, and we have 38 for our Senate. Now, when I have the red and blue, red is for Republicans, number of Republicans, and blue for number of Democrats. And you see in both the House and Senate, the Republicans have the power. And the power is not as much as it was 4 years ago or 2 years ago, but still they have the majority power. That means they have the Speaker of the House is a Republican, and the Senate Majority Leader is also. And they decide basically what goes to the floor for votes. Understanding that, but within that, as I mentioned before, we work on permanent issues. Within that, there are ways of getting majority support. And then we have the governor. The governor in our state, in our system, has veto power. And so that's very significant for policies and for legislation. So we talk about what types of policies can be changed, what kind of legislation that is used. There are three. There are statutory issues, fiscal issues, and regulatory issues. For statutory, so a statute is a law. So when legislation is passed and signed by the governor, it becomes law, it becomes enacted. And instead of having a House bill or Senate number, it'll have a public act number. And all legislation that's passed becomes law. It is the state of Michigan, people of Michigan, that are, this is the law for the state of Michigan by the people of Michigan. So we have a representative government, they represent us. And so advocacy in this area could include, but not limited to, encouraging legislators to introduce bills, testifying at meetings, communicating in support or opposition. Now, fiscal issues can be also legislative, but what sometimes people don't realize, sometimes the fiscal or the funding allocation is left up to the departments. So are we remembering that departments heads have a lot of say in how money is allocated? The legislature kind of says how much you have. How it's allocated is very important. Implementation is a big piece of where disparities and injustice happens. And then you have regulatory. Regulation is an administrative rule. And you know, if you may following any news, that's executive orders or administrative orders. Like in during the budget process, our governor did an administrative rule to transfer things, and she did an administrative rule to change the eligibility for our assistance programs like cash assistance, food assistance, and for our state emergency relief. So the governor has a lot of power in that, in regulatory. When we think about the levels of government, federal, state, and local, it's important to understand that when we're thinking about laws, we have to look at where that law needs to be changed at. And we're going to focus a lot on state. We can't forget about local and federal. But sometimes federal laws give mandates and limits what state can do. Many times state laws limits what local can do. So understanding those parameters is really important. So I'm going to give you a breakdown of how that works. So in federal, there are President, United States Senator, and United States House of Representatives. And even though it's called Congress for both chambers, congressmen are referred to as House of Representative members. In our state, we have the governor, state senator, state House of Representative. And I'm not going into the judicial pieces where you have the attorney general and judges. I'm limited to the legislative bodies. In local, it's the county executive, county commissioner, the mayor, city council, and school board. And locals, most of those laws are ordinances. Those can be very a resource as to having something passed locally and moving up to the state and then to federal. So just some of the basics of knowing your decision makers, right? We mentioned before about there, but who are they? I mentioned the Speaker of the House, the majority leader and the governor. So as we're thinking about advocacy and identifying who's the person that we want to influence, in the end, for legislation, the speaker, majority leader, and the governor, especially speaker and majority leader, they have a lot of decision power about as far as what gets voted on. Even if something passes a committee, sometimes the speaker of the house can like stall it, or the majority leader can stall it. So it's important to kind of know whether they support it or not. And committee members, where are the bills going to go, right? Most of the bills around homelessness will go into the housing committee, and so but also health and human services. Human services may have a piece of that. So it's really important to know what committee and who the committee chairs are for those committees. And they're named slightly different in the House and Senate. We'll do a brief little exercise or example of how to go online and find which committee bills are in and how to do that. And so where the bills goes is important. And sometimes, and actually, leadership decides where these bills go. So when they're introduced in the House or Senate, where they go, usually it makes sense. Sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it's based on if a committee chair doesn't quite support it, the speaker does, they may put it in a different committee. I'll give an example of the Healthy Michigan Plan, expanded Medicaid. When that bill was introduced, they didn't put it in the health committee. They actually put it in the leadership government committee because the chair of that committee was supportive of it. So there's never always. There's always exceptions to how things go. And committee vice chairs is really important too, because if the vice chairs are usually of the minority party, and federally they're called ranking members, and then the membership of committees is really important. Sometimes your local representative is on a committee, sometimes they're not, but understanding those who the members are is really important. And so knowing that is really important. And other influential members, right? And I could have asked a poll question on this, but it's the appropriation chairs. Appropriation chairs, that's where the money is decided, and their subcommittee chairs is very important. If you ever look on, I think it's probably still followthemoney.org, and you can see appropriation chairs get a lot of donation when it comes to elections because they're very influential. Now we're going to briefly go over how a bill becomes law. And I'm really going to go basics with this, and we'll send links for you to get further information if you want it. And you can always, if you have a follow-up question to Jason, the legal happy to give more information about it. So introduced in the first chamber, so it has to pass both chambers, has to pass the House of Representatives, has to pass the Senate. So it's introduced in one chamber, and then it goes to a committee, and then the committee passes it or doesn't pass it. The committee passes it, it goes to floor action. All right, and these are standard and the traditional things. This is not how all bills go. Some bills actually don't get stalled in committee, don't get to floor, or don't get to floor action. If it passes the first chamber, it goes to the second chamber. It goes to committee, either Energy Committee, Health Committee, Human Service Committee, those things, and then it goes to floor action. And then once it passes both the House and the Senate, then it goes to governors, and it has to be the same exact bill. It goes to governors for her signature or for the veto. And when you think about who influences bills, how do bills come about? Well, many times it is constituents, right? If there's a burning issue that we've really pressed our legislator about, they can actually get the bill drafted. The governor has great influence on bills that get introduced. Departmental staffs, lobbyists. My husband is a recovering lobbyist, corporate lobbyist, and they're very influential in bills, interest groups and business groups. So there are a lot of influencers to when bills get introduced. A lot of bills get introduced. There's about 2,500 bills that get introduced in our state, and they're probably only 5 to 10% that get actually passed. And sometimes 15%, that's a variable, 5 to 15%. And there are, it's called the Legislative Service Bureau. It's a nonpartisan group, and they draft the bills. The senators and the representatives will send a request to them, because it's all kind of boilerplate language, because a lot of bills impact past bills, and they do all the boilerplate language, but the content of what's going to be changed comes from the legislative office. And then House Fiscal Agency and Senate Fiscal Agency, HFA and SFA, they actually do the numbers. Okay, what is this going to cost, to actually have an idea of the cost to the budget. Then each party has a staff, a partisan staff. There's a Democratic caucus staff and a policy staff, and there's a Republican policy staff in each chambers. And then, of course, the governor has their staff. Then once it gets to floor action, they can add on amendments. And there's some other details that has to go to a third reading. Some of you know about. I won't go into that much detail. There is a process to get to this point before it can be voted on. And you have amendments. Amendments are voted on separately. There's debate, and then there's voting. And when you talk about knowing how to count, in order to pass most bills in the House of Representatives, you require 56 votes, a majority of the 110, and for the Senate is 20 votes. And when I say most bills, because there are exceptions, right? For some things require two-thirds votes to pass. I'm going to give you just quickly go online. There's this website, legislature.mi.gov, and this is a site that really can help you follow bills, know what's happening, know what legislators are doing. And I'm going to briefly go there, just kind of show you how this works. And Jason, let me know whether people are seeing this or not.
It's working fine.
Okay. And so you'll know that there's ways of you put a bill number in, and on your left, you'll see you can go to committee meetings and know how to do. But I want to show you how to email notifications in this site. You can get emailed notifications by any committee. And so if a committee's meeting, you can get email notifications about that. So I want to give you a sense of how that works. And okay, so now we'll go back to our presentation. So legislature.mi.gov is a good source to know what's happening. Any questions? I'm going to rely on information. So I'm going to just have you a sense of the civics review and how to follow legislation. So Jason, any questions?
So the one question we've received so far had to do with how this information relates to what we're actually going to talk about during Advocacy Day. And so not sure if everybody's paying attention to the questions or not. So just so we're clear, the material that Renelle is covering today is walking folks through the legislative process. What we're actually going to cover during Advocacy Day, when I mentioned that there's some training in the morning and we'll have materials available, that's actually specific to MICA's policy priorities, and making sure that folks are comfortable with going into legislative meetings and talking about various legislative or policy issues, and make sure that you're equipped with the data or talking points and you have an understanding of what those are, as well as making sure that if there's an opportunity to bring in local level data as well. So real quickly, this is just kind of setting the foundation and kind of getting people primed for what you're actually going to do on Advocacy Day and helping you give some context as to why it's important to meet with legislators. So this is kind of like the 101, and for those folks that are participating or thinking about it now, during the day of, we'll actually give you and in the lead up to it, we'll send materials out, but then during the day, in the morning, we'll actually walk through those with you. The other question that I was thinking about is so homeless services have benefited immensely from the lame duck that was 2 years ago. So obviously not last year, but the year before that. Can you just talk a little bit about what lame duck is? I know at the time, there was a lot of questions about why is this happening? And Michigan's one of a handful, from what my understanding, Michigan's one of only a handful of states that has a lame duck process. But we ended up getting a handful of bills passed during lame duck that were highly beneficial to our provider network. And I'm not sure folks really understood like what exactly happened once all the dust settled.
Great, thanks for that question, Jason. I really thought about mentioning that as well. And so it's good to have a basic foundation of how the process works. And each session is 2 years. So the sessions for legislature goes by when the House of Representatives has a new body. So every 2 years, there's a new a legislative session because of you have new legislators coming on board, and everybody has to get reelected, right? And so you have, and because of term limits, there's a lot of new folks coming on every 2 years. So it's really important to understand and to get to know your legislature. So in budget years, so the second year of a legislative cycle, which we are now, is really a short window to get things passed, because after summer or after kind of June, a lot of folks are knocking doors and getting ready for the primaries and the general election. And so you have until like June to get bills passed. And of course, there's exceptions, but the majority gets passed in that time. And then you have the second opportunity usually in the year, because when a bill is introduced, it only can last through that session. So any bill that's introduced last year and this year will be sunset or no longer valid at December 31st midnight. And so many times after an election, especially if something's more controversial, after the election, then they go into lame duck, probably the week after the election. And any kind of bills, pressing bills or bills they held on to and weren't able to get voted on, will be handled during a lame duck session. So many things happen, good and bad, during that session. And a lot of positive things happens, and sometimes things that can be harmful too. But this is because many of them are coming back to the new to the next session. And so for this year, lame duck will probably be starting like the last couple of weeks in November through mid-December, depending on what kind of pressing legislation there is. Did I answer your question, Jason?
Yes, you did. Perfect. Thank you.
So lame duck is what happens after the election. And this year, as we mentioned, all the House of Representatives are up for re-election every 2 years. So now the meat of it, Advocacy 101, what's your role, right? So to advocate, right? To let people know what is important, what you value, what your priorities are, and to educate, right? Many times, as I mentioned, there's many legislators have no idea what the issues are for the homelessness population, right? What are those issues? And so it's important for us to educate, and because we are the expert. Legislators come from all different fields, and if they're more knowledgeable about the committees they're in, but they all are going to be needed to vote. So making sure that we educate our decision makers at every level on the key areas is really, really important. And that's why it's important for folks like you to be engaged and to show your expertise. What is advocacy? It's basic. I use the example of our children. Children are great. They instinctively know how to advocate. You know, when they really want something bad, they want a bicycle, they do the background, they know what store is, how much it is, they have a birthday coming up. They do a really good job advocating. We also have advocated, if you have a child in school or a parent that's going to the doctor, we advocate every day. We just don't think about them that way, right? So, and so we need to actually have a more structured idea so we actually can have a formal way of advocating for policies that are important to us. Why do it? It furthers a mission. I know that, Micah, you have a mission that you want folks to know about and to push. So it actually, legislation furthers that mission, and changing public policy, because you really want to address the core causes of human suffering. And also, many times there's stigmas and things attached to it. So a lot of times you use you advocate, as relationship building and storytelling, actually change the culture of how people think about homelessness and other core issues. So let's talk about successful advocacy. There's 3 legs to it. So administrative and legislative, so that means the executive branch and legislative branches, and media. All right, how are we using the media in different forms of that, right? There's many forms of social media, formal media, and then grassroots mobilization. So where do we begin? What's the issue? And you kind of have a sense of what the issue is. And I think that on your lobby day, your legislative day, you'll be giving more information about that. But this is not a one-off. This needs to be a continuous process because if you go that one day and then do nothing else after, you have to really continually to push, make sure you are sharing the information on an ongoing basis. So understand what the issue is. Who has the power to change it? All right. So on legislative day, you're identifying an issue that the legislature can change, and you want them to support something. And sometimes it's opposing something, but supporting something is more often the case, right? And then knowing your audience, so knowing some understanding about who they are, right, and building relationships. This is how you begin it. And so as you meet legislative bodies and offices, go to the offices, you're starting to build a relationship with them. And we'll talk more detail about how that is. And that's one thing that I focus on a lot, is building the relationships. Do they know you? Do they know the issue? And if you see them in your local store, your local representative, would they know you? As we think about the issues need to be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound, right? So you don't want to be open to increased funding. Well, what does that mean? You have to be more specific, right? What do we actually want them to do in a specific way, in detail? We need this amount of, we need $100 million. We need $1 million increase in order to do this, that, and the other, to provide more housing, or is it a change in policy? What specific thing you want change? Is it measurable? Will you be able to know whether you're achieving the result? And part of it is, are we reducing homelessness, right? The attainable, right? Is something that's reachable. If you say we need $1 billion, well, that's not attainable in this climate. So what's attainable? And is it relevant? Is it meeting the needs right now? And it's really important to have a timeline, right? So we want this done in this legislative cycle. Anything that you're wanting to pass now, timeline has to be before December 31st, and not have to be reintroduced and start again. And you could have a second and third. You can have a short-term, mid-term, and long-term plans for this. I always think about this. When you think about relationships, I like this Mark Twain quote: "When you need a friend, it's too late to make one." And so as you're thinking about, if I called the legislator's office right now, I've never called before, it's less likely they actually, well, they'll take my information down. But if I built a relationship, they're more likely to have thoughtful consideration for what I'm saying. And so influencers, what influences legislators or decision makers as a whole? And their influence, just how we're influenced. All right, so they're regular folks, regular people. How they influence family, by friends, power, health, by values, constituents, right? We're all constituents. Knowledge, right? The landscape, what's the environment right now? Who has the most power? who has the most influence, and money. But money is not the end all, because in order for legislators to actually get to office, they have to be voted on by people, right? So it's interesting how sometimes we don't think about that. If you ever go down to Lansing, hopefully you do go to Lansing and go visit your legislators, they always want to take a picture, right? Because they really want folks from their communities to come and to talk to them. Now, I'm not saying they want you to discuss all the issues with them, but they really want to have opportunity to meet with constituents. So those are all opportunities for us to share knowledge and share our priorities, our values, and really what will improve the lives of our people in our state and our community. And as I mentioned, voters, right? So who are decision makers, right? As we had the other slide about federal, state, and local government, so all decision makers, how well do you know them? You know, as we think about that right now, as your March 11th day, you focus on the legislative body, but there's decision makers at every level that can influence. Sometimes if you are pushing for legislation, sometimes having your county commissioners do a resolution in support of it, knowing having the state representative or state senator know that local bodies are supporting it can be important leverage piece to have in that. So how many do you know? How well do you know them? I know I'm from the Jackson, Michigan area. You know, who's a teacher, who's a business owner, who's a farmer. The Senate Majority Leader actually is my representative, and I know he was a business owner and is. And so how does that help me think about how to how to message to him? It's really important to have that information. And so as you think about who are the decision makers you need to influence, so as you prepare for your legislative day, lobby day, that will be the first opportunity, but there are many levels and layers of that. And so who do you need to influence, understanding that? And sometimes doing a kind of a power map can help you think about it. And so it's like a visual tool, and you can identify who has power. People are influenced differently, and sometimes it's not a direct line. So it reveals key relationships, right, and kind of helps you with your advocacy plans. I have just Senator Lee here and different opportunities, but there's the example of a legislator about to make a decision on education, and somebody, a person who wanted to advocate, they went to church with his mother, who was a former teacher. So who do you know? Who are these relationships? There's not necessarily a direct line, but you may know someone who knows someone who has their ear. And how do you actually think about that through as far as you think about a long-term advocacy plan? As we think about it, there are people, you always hear this term general public. There is no such thing as general public, right? There's a base, you know, if you are, you know, for homelessness, you have a base of folks that understand it, that get it. And it's important that that base stays informed and not just give them shrift them with like just short kind of license plate kind of advocacy information, but actually keep the base engaged and informed. And they're persuadables, right? So hopefully on March 11th, you'll talk to a lot of persuadables for that. And then opposition. And when people oppose and spending a lot of time there probably is not best use of time, but it's important to kind of neutralize the message. But you want to spend a lot of time here, those who oppose it. But understanding who opposes is really important. When you go to your legislative meetings, if there's a significant person on the committee or a person who chairs it, they're opposing this, it's important to kind of know that as you're thinking about messaging. And decision makers, I don't care if they oppose it or not, they're not, you can't think of them as the opposition, because you think about as a future, there'll be future opportunities to persuade. So it's important to make sure that you are not putting in that category, because there'll be always future opportunities to interact, hopefully, with decision makers. Then you have influencers. And these are people, as I mentioned before, who influence decision makers. So as we think about preparing to advocate, Know who is in it with you. And probably on this call, you're all in this together, but you may not know who you all are. So, and I know the Michigan Coalition will help with this, but knows who's in it with you and who outside of the coalition is in it, right? There's many folks. There's business people who are impacted by people who are homeless, and so who are the non-traditional partners that you can engage as well? And organize. It's important to organize, to actually know the issue, know who to influence, and then how are you going to do that? Are you calling and visiting? And the number one effective tool is visiting, right? The number one effective way of messaging is and they're writing and calling. And writing, and a lot of times it's through emailing. Many times, if you don't have a relationship, it's the volume. So by being formally being in a legislator's office, if you had like 500 emails on one particular topic, wow, that's interesting. If we had email that was more personal, that even gave more credibility to it, right? And then when you're doing calls, understanding the issue, knowing the bill numbers, knowing all the aspects of it is really important. And then last thing I mentioned is practicing. You have to practice. Even when people come to the office, they got many times they were we call it enamored by the building and got distracted really easily. So understanding, practicing, where you want to make sure that you stay on topic. Even when you call in, it's important to practice the call. And all aspects are valuable, right? And there's all different levels. There's champions, advocates, there are contacts. And so people do visits down to people emailing, calling. It's all important. Change doesn't happen with all of this happening. So each role is valuable. It's just important people to be committed to their role. Wherever your role is, commit to it. And then commit to a story is very important, a compelling story. But there's a lot of involvement needs to happen in order to push or move legislation and policy. So what's next? So do your research, know which members are affected by it. If there's a data point that one member is affected more than others, knowing that information, right? Knowing who is chair of the committee, the members of the committee, knowing where they live, and what members that they represent. So it's important to have that research. Also setting up the meeting, the coffee hours, town halls, outside of March 11th, Lobby Day, there'll be other opportunities that you can engage in this process, right? And then people attend meetings in Lansing. I can't tell you how many times when I was working in Lansing, prior to the legislative office, people would show up on Mondays. Legislators aren't there on Mondays, so knowing when legislators will be there is really important. Understanding that actually building relationship with staffers is also important. Staffers can really help you know the schedule, know where to be, where to meet when things are happening. So having a relationship with staffers is really important. The state senator represents probably over 200,000 people. A state rep represents about 70 to 90,000 people, and there are about 5 to 10% that contact their offices. So understanding that you can really be powerful in this type of advocacy is important to know. So components of the ask, right? When you go there, what are you going to do? All right, so your issue, connecting it to a story, making it personal, make sure it's accurate. If you have inaccurate information, they'll totally defeat the purpose. And knowing and make sure it's relevant, right? When you talk to a legislator, they want to know it impacts their community, the people they represent. And it's always important to make the ask. I can tell you the number one thing people forgot to do when they come to a legislator or decision maker is the ask. What do you want them to do? So putting into action, doing your homework, right? Knowing the background, be prompt, be prepared. So you go there, you have a limited time. You're gonna have 5 to 10 minutes, right? It's outside 15 minutes. Even though they have a 30-minute appointment time, it's about 15 minutes where you're gonna really be able to make your ask. So understand that and be able to answer questions. And if you don't know, that's a great opportunity to build relationships. We'll get back with you on that, and then do. So follow up with a thank you, stay informed, stay involved. Any questions? before we go to the last part of messaging?
So the one question that's come in has to do with the materials for March 11th. And just as I said earlier, just a reminder, we will be sending, two things. One, we have a webinar next week specifically for folks who are participating in Advocacy Day, kind of a lead up. It's next Wednesday. And kind of for folks who are new to it, breaking it down, and we'll have materials available then. And I was just checking with Laurel, who's the lead for Advocacy Day, and she said that once we get the final touches on the handouts, those will also be going out next week as well. So yeah, everybody will be getting materials. There also will be an opportunity to talk with Laurel and myself next week on a separate webinar where we can specifically kind of walk you through what to expect on March 11th. Otherwise, those are the only questions that have come in.
As Jason mentioned earlier, this is kind of the 101 to prepare you for all the information that you're going to get and how to think about it and frame it. And so developing your message. So we talked about that when you go in front of a legislator or any decision maker, what's your message going to be? And how you frame it is really important, right? And so because framing can activate a lot of different things, including bias. And so you have framing around values, around symbols, right? Metaphors, and this metaphor or this symbol is resilience, right? And so it's important how you frame it, how you think about it. It really has, it's important to how you present the story and framing it. It's important to think about that as you are presenting your story and your frame. And because one thing I like to say, and which is something that people don't think about, they can have all the facts can be lined up and on a point, but the frame is different. People reject frame over, they reject fact over frame. So frame wins out over facts. So framing is really important. Framing around values. We all care about our state. We all care about people living active and valuable quality life in our state. And so understanding the value and framing it that way is really important in front of the facts. And so as we think about messaging, we use this framing box, and I'll make sure that Jason can send this out to everybody. But when you think about going and doing your ask, you want to have the issue, right? Where you're trying to change. And then, so what is that? What's the problem that you're working on? And we do have an example coming up. And then in the value, right? What do we value? How will winning benefit those impacted, right? And reflecting those values. But almost the most important, well, one of the most important pieces of this frame is so what? If you have a decision maker or legislator who doesn't get it, you need to have, so what? Why should someone care who's not impacted? Someone who actually doesn't think about people who are homeless, right? How do you, or even the issue of homelessness. And so how do you talk about this? So therefore, answer so what? And then what's the ask? What's the call to action? What do you want people to do? And here's an example through state ID for homeless individuals, right? What's the problem? It can take weeks for homeless individuals or agencies or the agencies working with them to obtain the support documents and the fee to purchase their state ID, right? What's the value? With the implementation of the fee waiver program through the MISOS, folks, Michigan Secretary of State, folks who are currently literally homeless are able to have the $10 fee waived, the saving funds, which can be used for another purpose. So what's that value in that piece, right? We actually are valuing folks who have to go through this process. In fact, that they don't have money. We're valuing the $10 savings with that. So this is about valuing people's lives. And then so what? Without a government issued ID, folks are able to access shelter, employment, or housing. And many times, especially legislators, you want people to be employed, all right? So without ID, they can't get employment. So how are we? We're almost just continuing the cycle. And how do we get people out of the cycle? What's the ask? Support Senate Bill 404, which allows for literally homeless individuals to ask for a fee waiver from the Michigan Secretary of State. right? So this is one type of message box and one type of message. This is an example that you'll be sent in your follow-up email. But just to give you a sense of how you can use this. It's important that when you're organizing, when you're practicing and planning, everybody understand what the ask is. So if 10 different people are going to different offices, you are making different asks. It's important. Redundancy is really important here to have the same message going continuously. And then when you're delivering a message, right? This is just this is organizationally or through the association. Do we have? If you ran to a legislator in an elevator, are you able to do a 90-second soundbite? Right? Are you able to do 104? Now I think it's what 280 characters for social media. And also long forms. You want your base and other folks. Many times you share information. They want, hey, give me more information. Are you able to disseminate the information in various different ways? That's really important to have. And then fact sheets. When you're going to visit offices or going to do testimony, having the one pager is really important. So knowing who your audience is. Sometimes people don't like. How are you laying it out? So writing layman's terms, simplify it, and some of this is basic stuff, but double, triple, and quadruple check all data. It's really important to have that, so it can be used by the legislator, and they'll be really embarrassing if something's not correct. White space is your friend, so understanding that you don't have everything blocked by ink and words. Font size. This is basic stuff, but really is important, right? And when you're doing social math, and there's a link I can send you for the social math to think about it. A lot of times you won't think about the children that are in poverty but fill up the University of Michigan football stadium, right? So how do you, I think 5 times over. So how do you think about that? And having that social math. And consistent color theme. These are basic stuff, but really is important when you are leaving information behind or meeting and talking with legislator or any decision maker. And then testimony. There may be opportunity as you build the relationship with the legislators, and I'm sure the coalition does this already, but having real people share their stories and testimony is sometimes really missing in that. And so making it personal, be brief, but also as I'm having that one pager to leave behind, so everybody on that committee in that hearing can have it and always follow up. As I mentioned, these are resources that we'll make sure are available to send out, but the social math one, and then lobbying, there are lobbying rules, and then if you're an organization, and the legislature.mi.gov is a site that I showed you during the presentation. So to end up, summarize, know the issue, make sure you know what the ask is, and then who is delivering the message, right? Right now, on March 11th, it'll be you and those that are a part of that. It's really important to know who's delivering the message. And because as the League for Public Policy, Michigan League for Public Policy, it shouldn't be us delivering the message. It needs to be folks that are really engaged and involved in the community level. It's really important to know who's delivering the message. And if you have someone who influences that person, understanding who that is really important in your planning. I would end with this. The most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. So it's really important. We do have power. How are we going to use it? Any last questions?
So we've had a few more questions filter in. One mostly around logistics for March 11th. And so the first question is whether or not today's session's been recorded. And yes, it has been recorded, and I can send the link out to everybody with the follow-up email. And that will include the slides that Renel's covered today. We've got a couple of questions now about the materials for Advocacy Day, and I think people are starting to get a little nervous, thinking like, oh man, like they're taking everything you just said, Renel, to heart, and thinking like, oh, we got to start working on our messaging, and we got to create handouts. So for those of you that have never done an Advocacy Day with us in the past, We do have handouts that we have actually folders that we put together, and they have materials with handouts and around specific issues. Every 2 years, kind of aligning with the legislative cycle that Renell was discussing earlier, the coalition has a legislative action committee that puts their heads together collectively and comes up with legislative policy priorities for the coalition to be working on. So we will have a number of handouts available to folks. Laurel was messaging me during Renell's presentation and asked me to include the link in the email that goes out this afternoon. So I'll send the URL so you can access the handouts that we currently have. As I mentioned earlier, they are in the process of being slightly updated for this year because we're still trying to sift through the budget process and kind of figure out who's asking for what in terms of the state departments and where the priorities are. So that's the only reason we don't have some things finalized yet, but we're happy to share with everybody what we've got. So at least you can put your eyes on it and begin to familiarize yourself. And if you heard us talk about our legislative priorities in the last year and a half since the beginning of 2019, they are still the same, except for the cases where we've had some wins, like the example that Renell shared about the state ID program, which of course we had go through the lame duck 2 years ago. So, so those things were slowly peeling off, but everything else is still there, like working on access to affordable housing, increasing the number of units of affordable housing that are available, increasing funding for service providers. All of those things are still in the mix. So we will get out as much information as we can when we, as soon as it's available.
Great.
Otherwise, yeah, we've had more comments come in. Otherwise, everybody's thanking you, Renell. And I already got a separate email from somebody who was on the session today saying that they just recently had a meeting with their legislator and employed a lot of the things that you were discussing. And it went very well. They were at a coffee hour and went in armed with good information, similar to what you mentioned today. And they had a really good really kind of heart-to-heart conversation with their legislator.
Oh, that's excellent. And as Jason mentioned, and this would be a great tease, Jason, I think everyone's going to join your webinar.
Yeah, I think so.
to get prepared for that. And this is an ongoing process. So I'm glad, thank you for inviting me to share. And I hope the people got at least grounded in what all the work that Jason and the coalition has put in to prepare for your legislative lobby day.
Okay. Thank you very much, Renell. Thank you everybody for joining us. And we're right at 1 o'clock. And I know that Renell's got another webinar to prep for. So thank you once again, Renell, for taking the time to share your expertise with us this afternoon. Thank you everybody for joining us this snowy day. And I hope everybody has a great rest of your afternoon. Thanks everybody.
Take care.